We turn now to a New York Times article raising eyebrows because of its title. Take a look. Here is a screenshot of when the article originally appeared on the website on January 11th. It reads, "Palestinians set up camps in Israeli-occupied West Bank." But later that evening, that title changed. The new one reads, "Palestinians set up tents where Israel plans homes." This was all captured by a website called newsdifs.org. We reached out to the New York Times asking why the change of title, but we haven't gotten a response yet. The story is about how about 200 Palestinians are setting up tents in an Israeli-occupied West Bank territory called E1. The group has announced they plan on establishing a village there called Bab al-Shams. For more, I'm joined now by Norman Finkelstein, excuse me. He's an activist and author of Knowing Too Much: Why the American-Jewish Romance with Israel is Coming to an End. Norman, great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
So first want to address this article. Is it simply a mistake, or do you think that it's something more than that?
Well, in a sense, it's a mistake because the people who are in charge, some of them are not sufficiently indoctrinated, and so they simply report the facts, and then somebody from the Israeli consulate or somebody from the Jewish lobby immediately gets on the phone with the New York Times and tells them, hey, you're not supposed to say things like that. And the New York Times obediently then changes the headline. Actually, since the dawn of the internet, the web, you can see this quite frequently happening, and it's actually kind of amusing. So during the latest Israeli rampage on Gaza in November 2012, around the second or the third day on the web, there was a headline. It said, Israel targets civilian buildings. And the story was about Israel leveling the Hamas government buildings. And actually, I was quite surprised, the New York Times acknowledging that Israel is targeting civilian infrastructure, which of course is a war crime. But within 2 or 3 hours, the headline changes to Israel targets Hamas government buildings. As I said, it's an editor here or there who is insufficiently indoctrinated, and so he or she simply posts on the web the actual facts as against the party line.
Now, of course, with the technology these days, this can all be captured and documented. We should mention, I do want to mention, because I want to be fair, in the body of that article, they use the term that they removed later on in that title. They did use that term, Israeli-occupied, in the body of the article. So does that negate the accusations of this bias? What do you think?
No, because they assume, rightfully, that many people just read the headlines and only selectively read the actual story. So they were concerned that people would be immediately riveted by the headline, and the headline was quite revealing, occupied territory. At least it's news for the New York Times. I should point out that in the real world, there's no dispute whatsoever on these questions. So in July 2004, the International Court of Justice, it rendered an advisory opinion on matters pertaining to the Israeli-occupied territories. And it said unambiguously, unequivocally, that the whole of the West Bank, the whole of Gaza, and the whole of East Jerusalem are occupied Palestinian territories. There isn't even a controversy in the real world on that question. And if you look at the New York Times byline, they typically refer to Jerusalem. They don't say Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem. They give it this nondescript title, Jerusalem. Well, it's not just Jerusalem. According to the International Court of Justice, East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory, like the rest of the West Bank and Gaza and the Gaza Strip. But in the New York Times, these elementary facts can't be acknowledged.
So are you implying that media outlets, New York Times as an example, that they're kind of weary of using these terms because it gives Israel a negative connotation?
Well, there's clearly an Israel lobby at work on these particular issues. The lobby is very effective, as they boast that they're very effective. And the New York Times, at this particular moment, the New York Times' base of support is basically the Upper East Side of New York City. That's its main readership, its main constituency, and so it's eager to please that very wealthy Jewish constituency in the Upper East Side. It's very easy to tell. In the New York Times, any story having to do with Jews, say there's a story about the production of blintzes in Brazil, you will always see it listed as one of the top 10 stories of the day. Anything having to do with Jews is immediately on that top 10 most read article list. That's their base of support. And so the New York Times is obviously, at the end of the day, it's a money-making enterprise, and it wants to please its base constituency. And so it tailors the news, and it cuts up the news in such ways as to please that constituency. And you're not allowed to say basic facts like the West Bank, East Jerusalem. These are occupied Palestinian territories.
All right, very interesting. Really appreciate you coming on the show and weighing in. That was Norman Finkelstein, activist and author of Knowing Too Much: Why the American Jewish Romance with Israel is Coming to an End.